Hey everybody, it's Buzz. Yesterday, I finally finished reading Ashita no Jo. So far, that's been one of the most highly requested manga to cover on my channel. I've been looking forward to reading this series for quite a while, and I never really got around to it until quite recently. And so I kinda wanted to share some of my thoughts on this series, since I know some people are curious about them. Before I get into the review, there are a couple of things I need to get out of the way first. Thing number one is that I didn't get into this series until quite recently. While I did know about Ashita no Jo for a very long time, it being so popular, it's kind of impossible to avoid knowing about it. I didn't watch the anime growing up or anything like that, so hopefully I have some more unique opinions about this manga, being in more recent Jo connoisseur, I guess. And the other thing I want to get out of the way is, this video is not going to be like an in-depth analysis of the storyline or like the deeper lore to this series. It's just going to be spoiler-free review. I kind of want to get some personal thoughts and opinions out of the way. There are a lot of really good videos on YouTube talking about the lore in depth on this series, and let's face it, I probably can't compete with any of those ones. And yeah, I guess with those all out of the way, I guess I can jump right into it. For the last probably year or so, Smitty on Discord has been telling me to read this series pretty much constantly, and I wasn't really into wanting to read an older manga at that time. So I went ahead and watched Megalobox, which is the like futuristic reimagining of Ashita no Jo, and I actually really liked that anime a lot. It really sold me on the idea of a boxing manga being something I would be interested in. That kind of raised a bit of an issue for me. The differences between Megalobox and Ashita no Jo are big enough that when I first started reading Ashita no Jo, it felt like it was missing certain aspects from Megalobox that I enjoyed. But after a little bit and I got more accustomed to the style being a bit different, the series grew on me as well. But anyways, so I'll read you guys the synopsis for those that want to hear it. Jo Yabuki has learned how to toughen up and stop trusting others after a troubling youth spent bouncing between orphanages and fending off bullies. After finally escaping the circle of violent temporary homes, Jo adopts a delinquent lifestyle in the streets of Sanya, a slum in Tokyo. He makes his way through the world with his fists, picking fights with anyone he pleases. Danpai Tange, a washed-up alcoholic former boxing coach, notices Jo's animalistic combat ability and attempts to mentor the wild teenager. Despite developing an explosive relationship, the two form a close bond and rely on each other to look after the other homeless children in Sanya. Unable to abandon his destructive habits, Jo is arrested for petty crimes. In jail, he meets and fights with lifelong friends and rivals, including the boxing prodigy Toru Rikishi. Continuously challenging Rikishi to fights, Jo is knocked out time after time due to his savage, brawling style. Falling in the face of Rikishi's controlled boxing techniques, Jo earns Rikishi's respect, and they promise that they will meet again and fight in a professional ring. So, Ashita no Jo starts out not really as a boxing manga at all. That was something that took me a bit to notice as well. This series is far less of a boxing or sports manga, as much as it is a human drama. The characters and the internal conflicts that characters go through are the centerpiece of this manga. While this is a sports manga, it doesn't focus solely on the sports, it focuses on the characters. Jo Yabuki is actually introduced very negatively in this series. He's introduced as a character who is almost written for you to hate him. He's giving everyone attitude for no reason, constantly picking fights with people, always trying to find the meanest things to say to people just so that they can attack him so he has a reason to fight people. What's so interesting about that is Jo does change and grow a lot in this series, and it really is the centerpiece. Like I said before, while this is a sports series, the main concept of this manga is more so how characters grow and change. This series likes to introduce characters in an extremely negative light, and then show you their strengths, and then build on those strengths. And that's a very interesting thing. There aren't very many manga I've ever read that have introduced characters like that weren't just villains. Like, sure, there's a lot of manga which introduce villains in negative ways and then show them grow, but for, like, the main protagonist being the main one that happens to, that's pretty unique. You don't really see that all that often, which is very good. It's very interesting. It's strange to say that a manga as old as this is still unique, but it is, to be honest. This manga has a pretty big cast. Yabuki Jo and Coach Tange, they're the main characters, but this series does have a pretty large ensemble. and a lot of the ensemble is actually quite well written as well. Most of the reoccurring characters in this series go through a pretty extreme amount of growth. Very few characters in this series actually stay the same, which is definitely this series' strong point. I've been doing nothing but really heaping praise on this series, but it isn't perfect. There are some things that I didn't really like. For instance, this series hasn't aged the best with some of the writing. For instance, one of the main characters, Shiraki Yoko, she is a woman gym owner, and in this series, there's pretty much every single volume, there's characters saying really sexist things to her, which obviously is realistic for the time period that this manga takes place in. But the thing is that even Yoko herself says things like, oh, since I'm a woman, I really shouldn't be here, and the here that she's talking about is like in a gym. So some of those things are kind of sus. Some of those things kind of rub me the wrong way. Like, for instance, there's talk of like, women can't watch boxing because their blood is too weak to watch people hit each other and stuff like that. It's like, what? And also, there was also some other controversy here too as well, with like a later character who's introduced, who is from a native tribe in Malaysia, and he is pretty much exclusively referred to by other characters as beast or animal and other derogatory things that really just are meant to be racist.
Hell to the no, 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 come on, hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no, hell to the no, to the no, 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 listen.
When a character like Joe, who goes through so much character development, turns around and says says slurs to characters, it's like, bruh, really? He grew so much. And then there's some really dated lines here. In general, I would say the world building and character building involving the different gyms and the other boxers that Joe fights and meet, and all the characters that are reoccurring that he meets at the fights, so many of them build this really strong world that really pulled me in, and I really wanted to read more. This is a manga where I got very invested in pretty much all of the characters, and I wanted to see what would happen next to most of them. And I usually don't have the best attention span when it comes to really large casts and characters that have like in-depth backstories, but for this one, a lot of them were genuinely interesting to me. Another thing I should probably touch on is the themes in this manga about injuries in boxing and how being a boxer can injure you permanently or even just kill you. This manga talks pretty extensively about sports injuries and boxing injuries such as punch-drunk syndrome and things like that as well. And yeah, I've never really seen a sports manga go in depth about like sports injuries like this. It's a very continuous theme in this series. Sports injuries and the consequences of boxing for your body is a huge part of the series, and something that pretty much all of the characters deal with. For instance, there will be characters that want to keep boxing and they know their body's at its limit and they might break bones or permanently injure themselves if they continue fighting, but they want to continue fighting because that's just how much boxing means to them. You know, like, would you continue doing a sport that you love even if you're gonna die young doing it? That concept and one of the metaphors brought up with this, like, you keep fighting until your whole body burns up and the only fuel that's left is embers, and you keep fighting until you're nothing but white ashes. That's a very well-known analogy for it, and it is a huge theme in this series as well, like continuing doing something you love even if it's a detriment to you, which I found to be very interesting and engaging. As far as a final score for this series goes, I don't really want to give this a numbered score, because I know that if I do give this series a numbered score, people are going to look at the number too strongly and not listen to and not really listen to the things I was trying to convey in this video. But if I had to sum it up quickly, I would say it's a series that'll keep you thinking about it for a long time. Would I say that it is as good as I heard? To be honest, not exactly. But the series also was very powerful in different ways than I expected it to be. So it kind of makes up for the kind of overhype aspect from all the things I've heard about this series. And I genuinely enjoyed my time with this series. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See ya.